Hey there, listeners. Today we're diving into something near and dear to our hearts. May is National Mental Health Awareness Month. It's a time to stop and reflect on the importance of mental well-being, not just for ourselves, but for everyone in our lives. In this episode, we're not shying away from the tough stuff. We're here to have an honest, raw conversation about mental health, including our mental health, the highs, the lows, and everything in between. Because let's face it, life can be messy and our minds are no exception. But fear not. We're not just here to dwell on the challenges. We're also bringing you some powerful insights, practical tips, and a whole lot of love and support. So if you're ready to dive deep, laugh a little, and maybe feel a little, then stick around. This isn't just a podcast episode. It's a reminder that you're not alone, that your struggles are valid, and that there's always hope on the horizon. Zaw, my esteemed colleague, friend, and my favorite practicing Buddhist.
Hey, Luke.
Welcome.
Thank you.
And as you might remember, Zaw, and some of our listeners, that we did a 4-part series last September on National Recovery Month, which were episodes 34 through 37. And we want to at least devote one episode, and most of you guys will be listening in May, and May is National Awareness Month for Mental Health. How does that sound?
Sounds good. Let's do it.
So let's look at this significance. And our collective listeners, did you know that since its inception in 1949, Mental Health Awareness Month has been a cornerstone of addressing the challenges faced by millions of Americans living with mental health conditions? I like to call it a national movement. This is really dedicated to eradicating stigma, extending support, fostering public education, and advocating for much-needed policies that prioritize the well-being of individuals and families affected by mental illness as opposed to stigmatizing them. How does that sound, huh?
Sounds good. Yeah.
So I think I'm going to give you some staggering stats to really underline why it's important for us to focus on this topic today. 50% of all lifetime mental illnesses begin by age 14, and 75% of all mental illnesses begin by age 25. So it's not like a middle stage or late stage of life thing that is half of us get these mental illness symptoms and experience these things at 14. Pretty young.
Yeah, very young.
Trying to look at my teenage years, and it's hasn't gotten easier for 14-year-olds, that's for sure. Mm-hmm. I'll give you another statistic. The average delay between onset of mental illness symptoms and treatment, 11 years. That's staggering to me is all. Mm-hmm. What do you think?
Yeah, it's alarming. Makes me think about mind and body. When you see a diagnosis in the body, it's accepted, there's treatment, let's get it treated. But when it comes to the mind, it's a different story.
It's in some ways, it's harder to identify whether it's from other people or ourselves. I mean, 11 years from first set of symptoms. So mental illness, mental diagnosis, we're talking depression, anxiety, bipolar, schizophrenia, you name it, that 11 years to be with these symptoms. Can you imagine? Think about another illness with a different organ than the brain, that if you're dealing with, can you imagine having just a broken bone for 11 years and feeling the pain and affecting your movement and your everyday life and not getting treatment for it for 11 years? Oh,
Suffering.
One more statistic. 1 in 4 U.S. adults experience mental illness each year, and only half of them receive treatment. So 25% of us experience some form of a mental illness each year. It's a lot. Mm. And some of us might not seek treatment if we have these symptoms for 11 total years. Oh! And I say that, but to empathize, but in some ways I can relate to it. And what I mean by that is I'm a mental health therapist, a certified addiction counselor, and one of the things that we've talked on this personally in this podcast before is finding a diagnosis for our 2-year-old daughter. And I even was seeking treatment. And by that, I mean, I was with a therapist. And even though I had a therapist through identifying this, rare genetic condition for my daughter, and there's certainly, I knew I was going through grief and change and fear. But even with all that, Zaw, I didn't realize how depressed I was. And that's wild to think about, but it took, 8 months to a year later for me to look back. And even though I was in therapy and I talked to you about it and close friends, that I didn't realize how depressed I was. So in some ways I can understand, not even in a stigma way, but I can understand that it can be hard to even identify these mental illness symptoms or challenges that we have with our brain and our mental and emotional ability. I mean, I live it daily. I help people with it daily. And talking to my wife was like, wow, oh yeah, I was really depressed.
Mm. Yeah. I think more reasons for the conversations and the dialogues to be available. I think that really is where the hope is, because it's almost like a muscle memory or muscle, like a built-in muscle that, for me, a big part of learning to treat my mental health comes from the place of allowing, creating space for me to feel what I'm feeling. Mm-hmm. And because there's that knee-jerk reaction that, I'm not supposed to be feeling this, Yeah. And then it adds more. Because, I can think about my own mental health, which is a long journey, but I'm in a much better place compared to before. But it comes from that place of, I should not be feeling this, or wait, this feeling is wrong, But when there is a space and the time, which is why I think therapy is really important, and then recovery community is very important, where you're able to verbalize where you're at without being shamed or without being judged. Other person like, yeah, me too. I know what you're feeling. There is strength in that.
Yeah. And I think you make a good point that whether it's I shouldn't be feeling this or I'm just now realize I'm feeling this is really nothing to be ashamed of. I mean, we might not see physical symptoms of cancer until it's spread all across our body. We might not be able to realize or listen to some of these symptoms that may be very subtle at first or close to non-existent, or we look back in hindsight and go, oh yeah, there are some signs there of other organ conditions, let alone the brain, right? Mm-hmm. So in some ways, it is a medical problem, just like heart disease or diabetes. Mental illnesses are health conditions involving, like we're talking about, changes in emotion, thinking, or behavior, or a combination of those. It can be associated with distress or problems functioning in social settings, work, or family activities. And then to add to it, I think you mentioned this, it can commonly be accompanied by substance use. Mm-hmm. To add to it, why do you think substance use is often associated in the medical comorbidity or dual diagnosis with mental illness? Why is that so common? I don't have a statistic for that, but we know it's common.
The dual diagnosis is very common?
Substance use, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it's a chicken or the egg kind of situation in my story, but either way, both are present. But I think about it in terms of the easy way out. So if I'm feeling something and if I want to change it, drugs and alcohol gives that right away, especially if it's not commonly accepted and if I'm not open to treatment or if I'm worried about certain things. I'm not going to look for treatment, but I'm going to look for my own treatment. Mm-hmm. And then because I have control over it, as opposed to going to a treatment center or sharing about with somebody. So that's why, in my experience, that's why substance abuse was a real go-to. And it also even added more to the actual symptom, So it's feed off of each other very negatively and take it to the extreme.
Hey, listeners. We've got something extraordinary to share, a chance to reshape your journey no matter where you are. You're familiar with Zaw and I's insights on our podcast, but there's more. Through the Recovery Collective, he offers life, mindfulness, recovery coaching, and meditation groups guiding you toward a fulfilled and mindful existence, no matter your location. Zaw's journey from a Burmese Buddhist novice to a skilled practitioner equips him with timeless wisdom and contemporary strategies. Whether you're navigating life's shifts, seeking clarity, or pursuing self-awareness, Zaw's coaching serves as a compass guiding you toward success. The best part? Zaw's approach centers on your growth and empowerment. He equips you with tools to tap into your inner strengths for continuous evolution no matter where you are. Ready to take that next step in your personal growth journey? Connect with Zaw and I and the Recovery Collective at 240-813-8135 from anywhere in the world. Investigating in your journey reaps immeasurable rewards. Let Zaw and I guide you toward resilience, clarity, and empowerment no matter where life finds you. Now, let's transition back into our conversation. Stay tuned, stay curious, and keep your journey growing. Yeah, and if we look at this medically, if my pancreas is dysfunctioning and not making insulin, well, let's compare it to the brain. If my brain is not releasing a lot of serotonin or dopamine, which is feel good, I can self-medicate or pacify or change the way I'm feeling, maybe to the level of feel good or euphoria, with drugs or alcohol. Mm-hmm. So for a lot of people, it is a changing how I'm feeling, even to the level of feeling good. You know, yeah. I think I have worked with many clients over the years that abuse drugs and or alcoholically addictively, but for a strong percentage of them, when their brain chemistry gets a little bit more balanced and change, all of a sudden their obsession or their compulsion to self-medicate goes way down to maybe nothing. Mm. And it's like, oh man, I don't want this or need this. So that is true for a lot of people.
Yeah. I did not grow up in this country, but I definitely fall under that statistics that you mentioned. Maybe it was more than 11 years until it was properly treated. But it does make me think about why alcohol and drugs were the treatment, but also at the same time, how adversely it affected the nature of the real symptom, because it promotes the isolation, the drug use.
Yes.
So that's why it makes the problem even more problematic. Yes. The more you use, you think you're going out and then you're socializing, but then your world becomes a lot more, my world became a lot more smaller, tiny little bit, and then it created more problems. So definitely they really affect each other very negatively. Mm-hmm. That's why there's also so much, common, it's the dual diagnosis is very common.
Mm-hmm. Can you give us a little bit more about whether it's your story with substances, and how do you look back on whether it's your depression or intrusive thoughts and the mental illness part, or challenges you've had with that as opposed to addiction? How has that journey been, if you don't mind sharing?
I can share, yeah. But it all comes down to not having any healthy coping skills, because life is challenging. I think everybody does suffer from some kind of mental malady to a certain extent, but I think there is some kind of a genetic or chemical disposition for people addicts and alcoholics and mental health problem. But for me, it was like a build-up of some little problem, and then dealing with that in an unhealthy way over and over again started creating more distance between my true self and my created wrong self. So for me, that was the setup for drugs and alcohol, because that was my coping skill. Yeah. For me, to be more specific, I struggle a lot with self-image issue, always afraid of things, not being confident, there's always something limiting. And then drugs and alcohol was like a coping skill for that, because it takes me out of it completely and I get to be real. in my head, but that didn't lead me to a good place. So, yeah.
Yeah, it's good. One example I see, I don't know if you called it like a underlying cause or condition, or using substances as a solution to that less than or that self-image. And it's not uncommon for people to seek therapy or coaching after 5, 10, 15 years of sobriety, because all of a sudden the substance use and the behaviors are gone, but some of the, whether you call it a mental illness or just mental health, can be some people's lowest points. And you hear people say in the rooms all the time, man, I had a bottom in sobriety, whether it's with depression or apathy or lack of motivation, or even for some people, it's suicidal ideation. And that is gone. The substance use piece and the direct behaviors with substances is gone. But I've certainly seen many people with 5, 10, 15, 20 years sober that go, oh, I'm still struggling with something and I don't know what. And that's, in general, mental health.
Yeah. I think a big part of, for me, like I think about solution, or think about like teachings, or like the most effective teaching or the most effective solution is a living solution, So if I'm seeing an example of a mentally healthy person, I'm inspired by that, So like that, I think that's really is like, hopefully we'll get to that point in the future, but like there's a lot of emphasis on, because body can be seen. So if I see somebody who's really fit, I feel inspired to eat healthy, stay fit. But then it's kind of different. Like when I see somebody who's mentally healthy, in a way of like, that person is so kind, I love being around that person, very compassionate. When that becomes like a good example, you feel more inspired to take care of your mind, because mind cannot be seen in a way the body can be seen. So I feel like if there is more of the promotion or more awareness of that, how important it is to take care of the mind, like, because you can just sense it by some examples. That will be more of like a strive for, okay, I'm not feeling good, let me ask help for that. By 14 already.
Yeah, I think one of the things that we will address is the reality is that can be in flux. And what I mean by that is, oh my gosh, I feel like I'm doing all the right things and I should be mentally healthy or not struggling with my thoughts or my mood. But guess what? It can still happen, right? Which can potentially create stigmas. And I don't want to focus on stigma, but I want to focus on acceptance, and not just mental health awareness. I can be aware that I can set up the conditions for me to be healthy physically, mentally, emotionally, and spiritually. And I'm not going to be perfect in always setting up the conditions for my mental health and physical health. And I'm not always 100%. I don't always give my 100% best. And I'm aware of that. So it's not the awareness that I necessarily struggle with. It's sometimes the acceptance, because I can be aware and it doesn't call for action. And I think that's one of the things that I'm hearing. It's the attractive piece for me, and whether it's my recovery or my health journey or me being I think a parent of someone who has special needs, it's that there can be dips and I can be aware of it, but being aware doesn't always call for action and a change in behavior or thinking, but taking the acceptance with an action, I think what do you think about that?
Yeah, I think that even makes that example even more attracting, right? I see somebody struggling, and I also see somebody asking for help, despite how great he was doing earlier, So like that, I mean, for me, that really is the human nature. And that person is being real when he does that. Otherwise, it's just a poster child kind of situation. I'm just happy all the time. There's no difficulty in my life, as opposed to I was happy, but now I'm facing something difficulty and I'm asking for help and responding appropriately to the situation.
Yeah, I think one of our messages that we wanted to get across today is, how do we take care of take care of yourself, you know? And there are numerous ups and downs, and some are solvable, and sometimes they're not so much solvable. So like when our mental health acts up, hopefully we seek support and treatment, like you're saying. And that's taking care of herself. And one of our common threads, that's I think a common message that we share in this podcast, and a collective solution to health and wellness, is collectively we can do together so much more than we can do individually. And I do a lot better when I get support to take care of myself. And that's one of our common threads that I think when we talk, I go, oh, this is one of the messages that I'm also getting from what we share today.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. For me, community is a big part of taking care of myself, which sounds kind of paradoxical. I'm taking care of myself by being involved in the community. But I used to journal write a lot, which really helped. But at the same time, in comparison, I think I wasn't a good witness to my own situation by myself. Mm-hmm. But like when I'm staying connected with other people, it's like a memory that I've created, because by nature, we're forgetful people. So like the more I interact with people, the more identity that I'm creating for myself. So like, because what gets us going is the meaning and the purpose. Because, I went through lots of difficulties going on, family situation, my country, military coup, like losing some friends. Like when that happened, I was like, why am I alive? And then that can create a really deep depression that, wait, what am I doing here? I don't live in my country. I'm living here. My family's here. I have children. Like, what do I do? But then when that happens, when you connect with the person, the people you've been staying in touch with, you get a reminder of, wait, there's a purpose for my living. Yeah. For me, that really is the key of taking care of myself, where, okay, my purpose is to show up, help others, keep getting better. And then the good thing about recovery community is that even if I cannot do anything, my purpose is to stay sober. That becomes like a really good building blocks for greater things.
And sometimes we just suffer in silence. And part of another message, and thanks for being transparent about that, is how do we take care of our loved ones? How do we check on friends and family? And sometimes all people need is, whether it's a shoulder to physically or metaphorically cry on, but if that's a huge chapter in your life of change and sadness and low mood and understandable existentialism. Like why, what is this all about? And just being present with someone and checking in on loved ones is just huge for treating mental health. Really is. It's a big one. I think that also feeds into talking about it. I can only imagine in that chapter in your life, you felt isolated, but did you stay isolated with your own thoughts and emotions during that time?
Not really. No, I have conditions set up that didn't allow me to stay isolated.
What do you mean by that?
People kept reaching out, I still have vocabularies for how I was feeling, and there were routines, meditation practice, like, mood follows action is what I've learned from that experience. I just got to keep doing it, even if I'm not feeling it. So it was very helpful. I did not feel isolated at all. I'm very involved in the 12-step fellowship. So I learned a lot from that fellowship, which is universal principles, from my Buddhist background too, is really about, kind of keeping my selfishness at bay. And the best way to do that is to be helpful to others, So for me, that really got me going, because the more I talked about it, the more I was relatable. Other people relate to it. And I felt more human, I felt more connected to other people by being real.
The more we talk about it, the more we normalize it. Mm-hmm. The less we aren't just aware of it, but we can lead to action and change. You go to a doctor and you're having some pain. What do they ask you every time? How's your pain? What is your pain level is very subjective and personable.
Mm-hmm.
And no one can deny that. But there's a reason why a doctor is, well, what is your pain level? How intense is that emotion? Is that physical, mental, emotional feeling? So we're doing it with this organ. What's going on? The more we talk about it, the more we normalize it, and we can do something about it. We can be aware of it, accept it, and lead to action and change. Yeah. I think that's another thing that's really important. I do this for a living. So when people have a struggle with the organ of the brain, which affects how we think, how we feel, how we act and react, which is one of the reasons why there's a stigma and prejudice and discrimination, because it's not that you've got a pain in your body. It can lead to thoughts and emotions and reactions, which can affect other people, and they don't like that.
Mm-hmm.
But people don't innately, there's no training manual to go, okay, what kind of help do I need? How can I get help for this? Who do I trust? What are my next steps? Whether it's therapy, whether it's an inpatient and outpatient, whether it's medication, whether it's other treatment modalities. And there's a lot of, in the next 20 years, there's going to be a lot of different modalities, physiological, chemical, and machinery even, to help with mental illnesses. So I'm going to encourage people to explore different mental health treatments. You're not an expert, so explore it. Google search 5 different therapy styles for depression or whatever you're going through, whether it's anxiety, whether it's panic, whether it's voices, whether it's grief of being married to someone that's a narcissist. You name it. Google search 5 different treatments for it. Turn on a podcast. There's a lot of wonderful mental health therapy podcasts. We touch upon that here. A Therapist, a Buddhist, and You. There's the Happiness Lab, the Mental Illness Happy Hour. There's a podcast called Terrible, Thanks for Asking. There's a podcast called Therapy for Black Girls, right? That's important to go, how do I relate to my issues, my depression, my anxiety, my cultural things that are affecting me? There's Therapy Chat by Laura Reagan, who's a wonderful local therapist who's been doing it for years, and she has a wonderful podcast, and a lot of it's geared towards trauma. There's YouTube videos. Just explore. We have so many options that we can begin to learn and begin to feel understood in some ways when we don't. Like I said, I didn't realize I was feeling depression. What is going on here? I process it with my therapist and my spouse, and oh boy,
Yeah, I'm still stuck on that thing about the delay, from that 11 years, because in hindsight, and I want this message across too, that these are challenges, but then also like kind of blessings in disguise too, because I've heard so many success stories where almost like to the point of like the chosen ones, where you have these struggles, the earlier you treat it, it's almost like a superpower where you get to treat it and then get stronger on the other side. And then you're not only an example, but like can be useful to other people if it's treated. Because, life is problematic. That's my Buddhist belief. That's the first noble truth. But then what coping skill am I coming up with? Like real solid coping skill. And once I use that, like all these challenges are dealt with, and then they stays with you, the coping skills, and then they become even stronger over the years, Yeah. So like if only I could treat everything that I was suffering at the age of 14 or earlier. The earlier it is treated, the better, or the earlier it is talked about, the better, because it gives you more strength. Very paradoxical. You get strength by admitting your weakness in a way,
Mm-hmm. Yeah. A collective solution to health and wellness, not just treating a symptom, but potentially underlying causes and conditions. And what I mean by that is Yeah, a person is their thoughts, their emotions, their feelings, their brain chemistry. And the human is the most complex puzzle that I can think of, which is just phenomenal and scary and frightening and makes mental health that much more challenging. But because we know that, I think that's one of the reasons that we often see things from an Eastern philosophy as opposed to just a Western, here's a problem, here's a symptom, get rid of the symptom, but not really always see the underlying causes and conditions. And that's kind of the approach that we take on this podcast, and that the guests we bring on, from the stellate ganglion block and the fight or flight response in people with trauma, and being able to stop that response. People can often do better with their trauma response and their fight or flight response, and changes the neural pathways of the brain. Cool episode. Check it out on SGB for trauma. But that's part of what I hope moving forward, what really policies and procedures and what we understand the brain to be. And this, I say a version of this a lot. When it comes to a health condition, the brain comes with the biggest stigma. If you look at any other organ, like we said, the pancreas stops producing insulin, people don't judge you and say, you're broken. No. If your heart has to work harder and increases blood pressure and is the precursor to 5 blocked arteries in your heart, and you need a quintuple bypass surgery, they're not going to say that you don't deserve the surgery. Now, I would also like for us to empower and going, okay, get the surgery, get the treatment, get the insulin, but let's also, whenever we begin to see these signs and symptoms, let's treat the whole person. And the stress, the environment, the nutrition, the physical, the mental, the emotional, the whole part of the person can directly or indirectly affect someone's mental health and well-being. Mm-hmm. And sometimes with some of my clients, that are very anti-medication, we do all those things. We change the environmental, the physical, the things that they have control over, with the thought stopping and the emotional and coping strategies and physical health and emotional health. And they realize, man, there's still this chemical thing that I felt like I controlled the things that I could control, and I'm still struggling with dark, intrusive thoughts, or this depression that won't change. And then they decide to introduce a medication then, or microdosing, or things that are new in the past 5, 10, 15 years. And they go, wow, I can finally my brain can finally exhale, or I don't have these dark, deep, intrusive thoughts, or I don't have this suicidal thoughts anymore, or for the first time since I was a little girl, I feel good about my decisions and I feel like I can have a conversation. So it's looking at the whole of the person, and sometimes it is the brain chemistry. Just like the pancreas isn't producing insulin, and sometimes it is for the people that they don't have enough serotonin or dopamine, or a trauma response has adversely affected, or a traumatic brain injury has adversely affected someone's ability to think, feel, and act in a way that they used to, and they need help with. There was a lot there, a little bit of a rant, but what do you think?
Yeah, I hope this podcast is helpful because, well, one thing that comes to mind in conclusion is pretty much the underlying thought that I want to cultivate, which is always true, and that I want everybody else to cultivate, is that no matter who you are, like, everybody is worthy of happiness. Everybody
Yes.
deserves a life of peace and happiness, and it is possible. So, but like, that hope can make a huge difference, because it's just an attitude, life sucks, things are difficult, but I know I deserve to be happy, Like, as soon as I am able to switch my attitude to that, like, what I do throughout the day is completely different. from like, oh, I'm just a victim, this and that. I'm just going to sit and not do anything, as opposed to, wait, I deserve to be happy. So what can I do? Go out, take a walk, make some coffee, talk to a friend, make some healthy food, read, whatever, or play some music, whatever it is. Like you just start doing things because you believe that you are worthy of happiness. And you start making things happen. So I really want to send a message across about the fact that not only that you deserve to be happy, but like that's the underlying innate nature for everybody. Everybody's looking for that same thing.
And Zaw, I've had more than a handful of clients that brain chemistry that's off, or the rewiring the neural pathways, the physical, mental, emotional, spiritual piece, and all of a sudden they have that sense of happiness that they've been void of for decades. And some of my clients get angry and resentful. It's like, and one individual I'm thinking of said, "Is this what normal people feel all the time? This is bullshit. If I had felt this 30% of the time, I'd feel like I'd be a functioning member of society." I think one of my messages is I don't want anyone to have to suffer for that long moving forward. And there's still so much, unfortunately, we don't know about the brain. And we're finding out now. We're in the infantile stage, but just now there's been some incredible findings with the brain and what can help change that chemistry in ways that serotonin and SSRIs weren't doing for some people. And the physical things that we are very proponents of, that you do have the power to change these things for a large percentage of people in their mental health. And if you're losing hope, reach out to someone. There are other potential solutions. And I think part of the frustrating piece is, and we see this with substance use, we don't want to suffer. And the continuous suffering can be really challenging. So seek out for help. Seek out for help. We'll provide a lot of services and the episode notes. And I think this is why we have to highlight that we don't want anyone to suffer for 11 years before they seek treatment. And eventually, one thing that we didn't provide statistics for is how long does it take for these symptoms to go away? Well, you and I, in the work that we do here at the Recovery Collective, we're very fortunate. I think part of it because of our philosophy is that we get to see people, a lot of their symptoms go dormant or go away. And then they have a proactive approach for their whatever their version of recovery is, and their mental health and their behavioral health is moving forward.
Yeah. Good stuff. Yeah, thank you for bringing this topic up. We can probably revisit it again because this is the main thing that we do. Yeah, mental health for me is happiness, meaning, values, in alignment with who I am. That's, so I'm glad we did this episode.
Yeah,
thanks,
good. Thank you all for listening. And as we close today's episode, we want to extend our deepest gratitude to each and every one of you for joining us in this really important conversation about mental health. Remember, your mental health matters, and it's okay to seek support when you need it or when you want it. We encourage you to share this episode with your friends, family, and community to help spread awareness and support for mental health. Together, we can break the barriers and create a world where everyone feels safe, supported, understood, and help with our symptoms. If you or someone you know is struggling, please don't hesitate to reach out for help. There are resources available, and you're not alone. Take care of yourselves, and remember that there is always hope and help available. Thank you for listening, and please share with others. Until next time, my name is Luke.
And this is Zaw.
Take care.